Welcome to the new and improved ConfigureITDone Podcast. The ConfigureITDone Podcast is now a place where we interview senior thought leaders in the SAP space across Australia and New Zealand, and the aim is to tap into their knowledge so we can pass on their insights to the listening SAP community. Please subscribe to the podcast and like, share and comment across Castos, YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
This podcast is in partnership with the Black Dog Institute, who aim to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. If you wish to donate to the cause, please click the link below.
Welcome to Season 7, Episode 9 of the ConfigureITDone Podcast. I've got my colleague Chris with me again, and Chris, you've got a fantastic guest today.
Yeah, we've got Mark O'Brien here from CITIC Mining over in Perth. Mark was recommended to us by Karen Swizzler from the SAUG Summit, the SAP User Group. So really glad to have Mark on today. Thanks for coming.
No, very welcome. Good to chat.
Excellent. Now, Mark, obviously we met before, and we're going to be discussing a topic that's close to your heart, and you've got a lot of knowledge. And I think you've actually spoke at the SAUG Summit about the topic of AI. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've had a long interest in AI. I was fortunate enough to sort of study it way back when it was a hot topic, a few decades back, and then sort of kept up with it. It's obviously morphed into something slightly different from what it was in the 80s. But exciting, and a lot of progress has been made in many ways, probably not a lot of progress in other ways. So it's kind of an interesting technology, but I think it's obviously become a very big hot topic now, and a lot of stuff going on. So definitely, yeah, it's an area that I spend a bit of time thinking about, and as we were chatting about before, just working on a PhD actually in my spare time, ever diminishing spare time around AI and ethics. It's kind of an area that interested me quite early on, just seeing some of the possible challenges and things that were going to be an issue with the way we use some of these technologies.
Yeah, I know we were speaking before, and there's a lot. It is a buzzword. It's a hot topic in the market at the minute. And I know you were keen to focus on what are some of the common misconceptions, because there's a lot of fear out there as well, and people think they're going to lose their jobs to AI. But if you can go over, I guess, Mark, some of the common misconceptions with AI, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. It's there's stacks of hype, and I think there's stacks of hype. There's also a lot of people who don't really understand the technologies, especially as they currently have shaped up. And I think, I suppose my biggest concern that I have in general is that, some of the AI is not that clever. And I think also, it does have some constraints to how clever it can be. It's very, very good at certain things. There's no doubt about that. And so there are clearly uses for it that are going to be, and are outstanding and very, very helpful. But there are other ways in which it is, I guess, best understood as something which is quite narrow in terms of some of the problems it solves. And yet most of people's fears are sort of around this general type intelligence piece, of kind of your Terminator type. Unfortunately, most of the sort of the stereotypical ideas that we have about AI sort of come from movies, fiction, which some people might argue that fiction sometimes paints the future for us. But I think the reality is we're a very, very long way, if at all, to develop some of those types of systems that we might see in some movies. So I think that doesn't help, because people have sort of these really poor understandings of what the technology is and what it can achieve, and that does drive some fear, and also perhaps some unrealistic expectations of what you can get with the technology. So I think that's, in general terms, those are the things that you have to sort of grapple with when you're sort of wading through some of the hype around AI.
You mentioned there around AI not being that clever. I mean, when I use some of the, like ChatGPT, for instance, or some forms of AI, I think it's like, that's genius. Like, can you dig a bit deeper in what you mean about it's not clever?
Yeah, look, I think AI is, and I guess I like to differentiate and say, in reality, most of what is labeled AI today is machine learning, right? There are some other approaches to AI which you might hear the term AGI, artificial general intelligence, and that's this idea of something being generally intelligent in the kind of ways that humans are, or maybe surpassing human intelligence in that way. Machine learning is really quite different. It's quite narrow. It's basically advanced maths and stats applied to empirical data to model up very specific scenarios and do that incredibly well. So, when I pick up my phone and I look at it, the security feature that recognizes my face and says, "Oh, that's who it is. You're allowed to look at this phone." I mean, that's incredible, right? That happens so fast that it's really astounding. That's an incredible use of the technology. We use these sorts of things in a lot of ways, but it's very narrow. What it does and what it does there is excellent. What it may be, there's lots of things it can't do very well, and certainly trying to create something that's generally intelligent across a lot of different domains and problem sets is much more difficult. So those are some of the challenges that lie ahead for people trying to figure out, how this stuff works. And I think an indicator should be an indicator to most people around how not clever some of this is that the job of the future apparently a few months ago was a prompt engineer. And I sort of think, well, doesn't that give you the clue that actually the AI is not that clever if you have to be very clever about the way you ask questions to get good answers? I mean, if you ask me a question and it's a stupid question, I don't just go, "Hey, Jay, you asked me a dumbass question. I'm going to give you a stupid response." There you go. I don't do that, right? I mean, I'm intelligent enough to go, "I think Jay might have meant this," So I'll try and intuit where you were going with that and try and give you a clever answer to that question. The fact that ChatGPT can't do that, if you ask it a dumb question and it gives you a dumb answer, well, that's the way it is. And then you've got to ask smarter questions or interrogate it in cleverer ways to sort of try and get what you want out of it. Now, I think that to me is just also one of those little indicators of the technology, what it actually does and what it doesn't do. And so it's very clever at certain things, but other things not so much. So I think it's part of the journey is figuring out what the value is and what it isn't. And I think that's going to be, one of the things that we need to do as we go through into the future.
Yeah, sure. That's really interesting, Mark. It's definitely a good way of looking at it. But I guess in terms of the next 5 years with AI, what's a realistic prediction or what do the next 5 years look like in your opinion?
Yeah, look, I think it's any kind of prognostications like this get kind of interesting because there is sometimes I feel like we shoot too low and things really surpass where we think they might go. And then in some ways we don't go too far at all. I think we'll see more sophisticated machine learning type stuff for sure. Definitely all of the companies working on some of these coming up with new techniques and new approaches to make some of the systems smarter and more interesting. I think one of the things that we've definitely seen in the last year or so, particularly with the ChatGPT phenomenon, is the ability to shape a tool that it was very accessible for people. Before that, a lot of these large language models, they're actually not new technology. They've been around for quite a long time. It's just that there have been one or two advancements to make them a bit better. But I think the big killer feature really of ChatGPT was creating it as a chat engine where you could just like use your thumbs and punch in questions and get answers right. So I think that publicly kind of accessible bit I think was a big innovation, and we'll probably see a bit more of that kind of exposure of the tools to people in ways that are really usable like that. I have a theory. I mean, I could be wrong on this, but my hunch, just looking at the trajectory of some of this stuff, is that I have I think I coined the term, but I could be wrong on that. There's probably somebody else out there cleverer and faster than me. But AI is infrastructure. I think, like a lot of infrastructure where you just don't see it anymore, it's just there and it does its thing. You plug something into the wall and you get power, and you flush a toilet and stuff happens, and you don't know anything about what happens on the other side. It just all happens. I think AI to me is going to probably slowly, seep into the background and not be quite as foregrounded, but it'll be doing some cool stuff behind the scenes, and we'll just assume it's there and doing its thing, and ultimately it'll make products better. I still think vendors and people will, put big stickers with AI on them because it's still a hype piece for a while, and a selling feature, I guess. But as more and more, no one buys a phone because it's AI enabled, but the fact is an iPhone, almost every piece of the software in it has AI baked into it. In fact, Apple spent a huge amount of money building their own chipset to enable machine learning on the platform, and pretty much all the manufacturers of phones have done that. So AI is baked into your phone. It's just no one's putting a big label saying, "Oh, this is an AI special phone." So I think it'll sort of go that route. That's my hunch, that it'll slowly background a bit. And become, I guess, more ubiquitous in terms of where we find it, but probably we will notice it less and less in some respects.
So it almost becomes kind of normalized and not a buzzword, basically.
Yeah, so one of the things people often ask me is, is your mining company doing anything with AI? And I'm like, yes, of course, and so is yours. And then, what do you mean? We don't have a team working on AI. And I go, you don't need to. Every one of your vendors is AI baked into their tools, right? From all the way from pit to port, as we would say. There's all the way through that. There are systems that optimize. There's systems that are monitoring. There are systems that are doing health type stuff on different pieces of equipment. There are safety systems. There's just a lot of stuff where machine learning is baked into them, right? So it's everywhere. Or, every cybersecurity type tool and platform has machine learning in it. There's just a lot of that already happening. Vendors are doing it because it makes better products, and the reality is you just don't see it. But I would say every mining company is heavily invested in AI. They just don't know it.
So focusing on that, obviously you come from the mining industry. I think you've just recently done talks at mining conferences. But where do you see the mining industry using AI, and where they're going to take it?
Well, look, mining, like a lot of manufacturing type endeavors, has a lot of moving parts. They're a system of systems. There's a lot of things to optimize. So right across our whole value chain, there's a lot of places where there's optimization going on. There's a lot of monitoring of equipment going on, and these are things where things like machine learning tools that use machine learning can do an exceptional job, far better than any human. We have trucks, massive ultra class trucks, that are pushing out massive amounts of data, across a number of channels on all the various subcomponents. And we're able to monitor all that stuff and keep an eye on it, and correlate that data, build models that tell us that if, these 4 things start to do interesting things, maybe there's a problem. So those are things that humans can't do very well, but machine learning algorithms are exceptional at that. It's very narrow, as I said earlier, but it's an exceptional value piece if you can figure out that something's not going very well in a real time kind of way like that. That's, so we definitely see those kinds of predictive maintenance type solutions happening. We also, there's a lot of safety systems now, a lot of monitoring of CCTV. Are people in places where they shouldn't be? I think there'll be more systems coming along that sort of very easily say, someone wearing the right PPE in certain places, and we can pick that out, or stop systems in time to prevent harm and injury. There's a lot of machine learning going into exploration. In the past, people would look at drilling data and things like this and try and, assess this stuff themselves manually. Now we're seeing a lot of systems that actually can take drill cores and clusters of exploration data and actually begin to process it in very advanced ways that are, showing that, for instance, you can drill a lot less holes. Drilling holes is very expensive. But if you can get the same kind of insights over what's going on with fewer holes and better outputs from the data that you're collecting, then these are all high value kind of ways in which we're using these kinds of technology. So really, it's everywhere, right from exploration right through to optimizing shipping. At the other end of the pipeline.
Sure, that's really interesting. But from an SAP perspective, Mark, like how can SAP customers integrate AI to benefit their business?
Yeah, look, I think SAP is like a lot of vendors. I mean, they're talking a lot about AI in their products, and look, that's a good thing. I think I've seen some really good use cases here and there of ways in which it's being used to, take large amounts of data and do some kind of intelligent processing on it to give insights out of that. The whole data and analytics piece, I think, is a huge thing. For years, we were collecting a lot of data, but not really able to make good use of it. And I think SAP for most companies is a huge repository of interesting data that whether it's warehousing data or customer data or whatever. I think SAP is well placed to apply some of these technologies to those types of problems. We've got we've got our own systems here where we used to have to sort of manually take people's credentials and other certifications and things like this to put into a learning management system so we can make sure people actually are qualified and able to do the jobs they're meant to be doing in a safe way. That all used to be handled pretty manually. Now we've got a system where people can submit that stuff, and the system basically slurps that in, analyzes the driver's license imagery and all this, and takes all that data and puts it in the right places. So, these are all pretty useful things, and there's a lot of similar types of use cases to that. But I think, and this is one thing where SAUG, I'm part of a subgroup now within the SAUG entity that's looking to focus on AI. And, one of the things that we're wanting to push SAP and other vendors around is to say, be more clear around where this, don't just use AI as a selling label, but actually let's kind of really understand where that's adding value and kind of paint the pictures a bit more. But ultimately, as I said earlier, I think what will happen is sort of the AI sticker will disappear a bit, and the tools would just be better because they're using machine learning, behind the scenes to get faster results or more insights or help you with things in more efficient ways than you can do yourself. So I think, ultimately that's going to be where we see that stuff. Anywhere where there's data, right? Whether it's a truck or whether it's your ERP, I think that's where machine learning has a huge role to play.
Sure. So, Mark, you've obviously got a lot of knowledge in this space, and it's kind of a topic that's close to your heart. But if someone wanted to learn more about AI, how do they best educate themselves?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question. I kind of used to think that was actually quite an important thing for people to sort of dig into, try and understand. Given the amount of hype, to really dig into these things, try and understand them more. I think the challenge with that is some of this stuff is quite difficult to really understand, and frankly, there's some nice academic papers written about the fact that even with the ChatGPT type tools, that even the developers don't really understand how they work in terms of the neural networks. So, there's one nice paper where basically, they're articulating the idea that essentially when developers try and fix problems that are there, they get interesting results. So even trying to just make some tweaks and modify what it seems like undesirable behavior gets some stuff you didn't quite expect on the other side. So that's part of the mystery with some of these machine learning algorithms, particularly the ones based on deep learning type approaches, neural networks, where basically a lot of what happens in that process of building the model is pretty dark and mysterious. And that's a big problem, actually, because it kind of diminishes the explainability fact. How did you come up with this answer? Well, it's really unclear. The answer seems right most of the time, but occasionally it's going to be wrong and you don't know why it's wrong. What didn't it get about this particular loan application or something where it knocked it back, but did all the right things over here or whatever. Now, some of that might be to do with data bias and other things. Data is obviously a key factor here in terms of the accuracy of these things. But I guess all that to just say that a lot of these algorithms are kind of unexplained sort of black boxes where a lot of stuff happens that we're not quite sure of how we get the results that are pretty good most of the time, but maybe sometimes not so good. So I used to think, well, education's a key bit, but that is a bit difficult because some of this stuff's quite complex. I think I'm moving to the point now of thinking, okay, maybe trying to educate yourself. I mean, some people might find it interesting, and I think it is quite interesting, some of it. So definitely don't hold back if you feel like that's an area you want to dig around in. But I think what I'm sort of seeing now more is encouraging people to just experiment. Take a tool like ChatGPT, play with it, go into it with the expectation that it is a tool. It's not a perfect tool. It won't do everything, no matter what people are telling you. So experiment and play with it and kind of get a feel for, where does this thing actually add value and where does it do some cool things and helpful things, and also realize where it's not good and sort of refine the way that you use some of these tools to get good value, because at the end of the day, they're just tools, right? And I've noticed even my own usage of ChatGPT, when it first came out, I sort of jumped in, I was trying lots of stuff. Some stuff was excellent. Some stuff was pretty mediocre in terms of what I got back. And that kind of made me think, well, okay, I'll use it for some of these types of uses, but for this sort of stuff, not so much. It's not going to give me what I'm after. Maybe there's another tool that does, right? But in some tools, there are a range of different tools that some of them are definitely better than others, just depending on how they've been put together. So I think it's an experimentation thing. I would say is probably where I would go with it, is to say you don't necessarily need to understand the tools 100%, but play around and actually get a feel for which ones give you good outcomes and which ones don't, and be discerning and judicious around them as you would with anything else.
I don't know if I should be scared, Mark, or embrace it. What do you think?
Oh, look, I think it's like any new technology that comes along. People sort of it freaks people out a little bit initially, but I think the reality is that these things aren't going away. They will become more and more sort of embedded in the workplace and our general workaday lives. So I think it's probably worth figuring out how to use them. I mean, it's like I kind of think of it a bit like this. I mean, I used to, you guys are too young to remember when having little map books to get around the place. When you didn't know how to get from A to B, and you'd have this little directory thing with maps in it. You'd basically peel back and look at pages and figure out where you're going and how you're going to get to A to B. Google comes along. A lot of people sort of, I don't trust it. But I mean, nowadays, even if I'm taking a relatively short journey, I'll still whack it into Google in my car. And I remember my dad saying to me, "Why are you doing that? You know the way to go." And I go, "Yeah, but it gives me all this traffic data, So yes, I know where I'm going. I don't need Google to tell me that, but it's giving me a lot of value add stuff. It's kind of good. If there's an issue with traffic suddenly, it'll take me down another path and give me some insights around that now. So there are ways in which these things do change the way we behave and make decisions and inform, kind of add to our lives in interesting ways that, go back a few years and you'd think, well, that's kind of crazy, but it's kind of the reality now where we tend to just do that without even thinking, right? And I think a lot of these tools are going to be like that, where we initially maybe a bit skeptical. There's no doubt that trust is a key aspect with AI systems. Because I guess if you keep in mind that one of the fundamental things that machine learning algorithms are really doing is predicting things in a whole range of ways, whether it's predicting your traffic best outcomes or whether it's predicting based on a prompt that you put in what the right response is out of a ChatGPT thing, or whether it's predicting that, there's 5 things that are looking interesting on this machine and in 72 hours it's going to break. Now, all of those things require a certain level of trust and validation to kind of feel like, I'm going to use this as a decision support tool of some description in my life, whether it's just to guide me from A to B or actually to take a multi-million-dollar asset offline so I can take a look at it more carefully. So trust is quite a big thing. I think that's one of the things that we sort of see with any new technologies is there is a bit of a journey of trust and then figuring out, are we happy to rely on it? Some of the initial dictation stuff, if I'm blunt, Siri sucked for a long time, when you sort of ask Siri questions. I'm afraid it's going to kick off in a second. But, when we sort of, the early stuff with Siri, it was just, you just gave up on it because it was pretty unhelpful. More recently, it's become more helpful, right? And I think initially I just stopped using it, but more recently I've started to use it more because actually the evolution of the technology has gotten a lot better, and so you're actually getting value that you feel like you can trust and rely on. So I think ultimately a lot of the journey of the adoption of new technology sort of has an interesting pathway where you've got to get past the hype. You see all the stuff that's not so helpful and good, and then you kind of forge your way through some of that to eventually, if it's a good technology, it hangs around. It's actually useful in the long run.
Yeah, sure. So some really, really good insights there, Mark, and it's clear to see how passionate and knowledgeable you are of AI. But if you could summarize, I guess, 3 key insights or 3 key benefits of AI to our listeners, what would they be?
Boy, off the top of the head. 3 key benefits. So look, I think one of the things is definitely in my own life, I'm seeing that certain AI tools are definitely able to speed the way that you look at certain topics or get information. There's no doubt that that's pretty good. For an example, more recently, whereas maybe if I was interested in some topic, I might do 3 or 4 Google searches and, pull up some different things, go look at a bunch of websites and kind of explore a topic. More recently, I've sort of gone, okay, well, let's just ask ChatGPT about this topic, and I get a bunch of stuff back. And that's quite interesting and useful, and quite, it aggregates all of a whole bunch of information on the net for me. Some of the integrations with search engines now mean that it's not just trapped in time, so it's not 2 years old data. They're actually adding in more current search data into that mix to try and keep it reasonably fresh. So, the speed at which you can access information and aggregate it, I think that's a huge plus right there. I think, every day I know I'm using a lot of AI tools for, like your traffic stuff and your other things where it's, these ways in which it just provides insights into your existence that help you out with, with a lot of very basic things is pretty good. And I think that will continue going forward. I think if I look at the flip side of that and the downsides, I think the hype will continue for a bit. And I think that will kind of lead to, unrealistic expectations about what's possible, which I think will still be there a little bit. I think also, as I said, it's really experimenting and understanding what the value is. So for instance, I want to find out about, I think now I actually did this just the other day, I was looking at a particular topic and I was just like, tell me about this thing, right, or this place, and get a whole lot of information back. It's really good. The flip side is the reality of the way a ChatGPT works is that it gives you the best average answer, right? It's taking a whole lot of data, putting it into a kind of a knowledge graph that when you ask it questions, it predicts based on all this empirical data what the best kind of average answer is to that. So that's okay if you're after average. What I would not do is and this is a personal thing, I'm sure there's plenty of students who are happy for this, but I would not want ChatGPT to write my essay because it's going to be an average essay. Now, people look at it and they go, wow, check that out. Look at it, built an essay. No, it's not a great essay. It's an average essay. It's a derivative essay, right, based off just a whole lot of data and it's picked the best average kind of response. So, yes, if you're after mediocrity, use it for those purposes. But I don't think that's a good use of it. Like for me, I've tried this where I've gone, okay, I'm giving a talk somewhere. Let me see if ChatGPT has some more. What do you think I say? And it comes back with a thing, and I go, okay, that's covers the territory, but that is as boring as I'm not going to use that, right? Because people will be snoozing or multitasking during my presentation. That to me is not an excellent presentation. I'm going to maybe take that, but I'm going to make some massive mods to it because I want to be interesting. I want to be insightful. I want to surprise people. ChatGPT is not going to do that, right? What it'll do is give you average very quick and very thorough. If that's all you need for certain things, which it is, that's great. But for certain tasks, it's not going to be good enough, or shouldn't be good enough. So I think that's where as an individual, you're going to need to really assess the value of these tools. Now, if you're a lazy student who's just happy to cruise through and get ChatGPT to write your essays, okay, but they'll be very average. And if that's all you're after, okay, great. But, I think a lot of people aspire to be more than that. And the reality is that because of the nature of the way ChatGPT is created, it's never going to create Shakespeare or, any of the greats. It doesn't have that capacity. It could write in their style because it's slurped that in, but it can't create their works like them, right? Because they were surprisingly interesting, different approaches to telling a story or doing a poem or a play, and often subversive or breaking tradition or doing interesting things, right? The great artists do these things. Now, ChatGPT is never going to do that. It's going to give you average. Yeah. So I think again, it's really understanding the technology enough to play around with it and realize what you're getting back and is it good enough for what you're trying to do. I'm not saying it isn't. I mean, I think sometimes good enough. If I'm searching, tell me something about Kent, it'll give me a whole lot of really good information. It'll give me all the average understanding really quickly, aggregated nicely. Boom! I don't need to go look at 10 Google sites to get an understanding of everything I might want to know about Kent and ask it some other questions about it. It's going to give me that in a nice ready-made form, which is great. It's not going to give me any crazy obscure theories about Kent. It's going to give me, pretty much the standard playback. Well, that's good. It's perfect. But for some tasks, you probably don't want to use it that way.
Mm. Mark, I've learned a hell of a lot today. That's brilliant. Definitely putting a different lens on it and viewing it in different ways in the future. So we really appreciate you coming on. And one question we always ask any guest on the podcast is future guests, and that's how obviously we got to you today through Karen. And thank you, Karen, for inviting Mark onto the podcast. Who would you like to listen to, Mark? And maybe someone that you've worked with in the past or someone that you've heard speak before that would be good on the Configure It Done podcast.
There's a fellow, I'm trying to remember his name now, which sounds terrible, but I shared a lunch with a fellow who's working in the AI space around vision, and actually he was the one who got me thinking a little bit more about this whole thing of what you're actually getting out of these machines, and I thought it was a really good insight, and I think he'd be quite an interesting guest because I found him quite thoughtful. I'll dig his name out for you. Brilliant. Because it's not coming readily to my mind, but he'd be a good one, I think, as this technology sort of being used in a very specific way around vision and vision analysis. I think is the video analysis stuff is being used in a number of ways, and one of the things we haven't talked much about is ethics through here, but clearly these systems that are so heavily based on data are quite easily swayed by what that data looks like and how that then gets pushed back out. And so bias and a lot of unhealthy things are easily enough kind of demonstrated by some of these systems if we're not careful. And I think then, there's also other things around how do we want to use some of these systems? What are healthy ways for us as a society to sort of think about the use of things like video monitoring. And, as I said, I've just been in London and you can't go very far without being on a camera somewhere. Now, we look at that and we go, that's an advantage. There's some nice things that come with that, but there's also some unhealthy things that come with that. And the philosophers have explored these topics. There's the great panopticon kind of piece by Bentham many years ago that talks about this. Do we really want to be in a space where you're being constantly surveilled? What does that do for us as people and as a society, right? But definitely there's a lot of, I think one of the things that bothers me a bit is the way that some of this technology is just being deployed without a lot of thought as to the impacts. Mm-hmm. And as I said, some of the big tech companies have done some amazing things in terms of innovation, but also some terribly unhealthy things in terms of how these technologies play out in terms of the exploitation of private data and a lot of things like that. Where I think we ought to be asking more questions. And we haven't been. So I think those are good topics. this other fellow would be a good guy to talk to because he's working in at least one of those spaces where they're using a lot of data off cameras and very useful in some ways. Be interesting to see what his insights are around some of the unhelpful things.
Excellent, no problem. Well, we'll definitely follow up and get the name off you afterwards, and yeah, that'll be a good podcast for sure. But Mark, really appreciate you coming on. Chris, thanks for inviting Mark on today, and I'm sure we'll speak soon.
No, it's been good. Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Cheers, mate.
Good on you.
Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the ConfigureITDone podcast.